73 species had sent their best young warriors to the Concord Institute that year. Every single one of them looked like they belonged there. Every single one except Danny Wren. She stood in the back row of the orientation hall, 5'6", brown hair tied in a messy ponytail, wearing a training uniform 2 sizes too large because the Institute did not stock human sizes. Around her, the galaxy's finest towered and flexed and growled. The sorority cadets were 8 feet tall, with bone-plated skin and 4 muscular arms. The Brun were built like boulders, heavy-gravity dwellers whose stone-like flesh could stop a bullet. The Polani were thin and insectoid, their compound eyes tracking every movement in the room with reflexes 12 times faster than anything human. Danny was the only human ever accepted into the Institute's combat and endurance track. She had earned her spot through an outreach lottery, a diversity program. Nobody at the Institute expected a human to actually show up. When she walked through the front gate 3 days ago, the admissions officer had checked her file twice and asked if she was lost. She was not lost. Instructor Joel Heron, a scarred sorority veteran missing one of his 4 arms, called the cohort forward for baseline strength testing. A calibrated resistance machine sat in the center of the floor. Each cadet would step up, grip the handles, and push. The machine would measure raw force output. The sorority went first. Their scores lit up on the holographic board. 800, 900. One cadet hit 1200, and the room rumbled with approval. The Brun followed. 1500, 1700. A massive Brun named Fossick slammed the machine so hard it rocked on its base. 2004. His stone shoulders cracked together as he laughed and walked back to the line. The Polani scored lower on strength, but dominated the reflex portion. Their thin limbs moved in blurs that Danny's eyes could barely follow. Then Heron looked at his list and called her name. The walk to the machine felt longer than it was. Danny could feel every pair of eyes, every compound lens, every heat-sensing pit locked onto her. She gripped the handles. They were cold and too wide for her fingers. She planted her feet, took a breath, and pushed with everything she had. The number appeared on the board. 87. For a moment, the hall was quiet. Then Fossick started laughing. It was not a mean laugh at first. It was the kind of laugh that comes from genuine shock, like watching a small animal try to push a boulder. But it spread. The sorority joined in. The Polani clicked their mandibles in rapid patterns that Danny had already learned meant mockery. A few Bruns slapped their chests in amusement. 87. The lowest score in the recorded history of the Concord Institute. Danny released the handles. She did not look at the board. She did not look at anyone. She walked back to her spot in the back row, sat down on the bench, and pulled a small notebook from her pocket. She opened it to a blank page and began writing. Fossick noticed the notebook. He found it funny, too. What could she possibly be writing? A farewell letter? Heron ended the session without commenting on her score. He dismissed the cohort for evening meal. Cadets filed out in groups, talking loudly about their numbers, comparing, boasting. Nobody spoke to Danny. Nobody even looked at her as they passed. She ate alone in the dining hall. The food was designed for species with different biology. She had brought her own protein bars and a water bottle from Earth. She ate quietly, watching the room the way a person watches a river. She was not looking at who was strongest. She was looking at how they moved, how they sat, how they favored certain limbs, how the sorority always reached with their upper arms first, how the Brun turned their whole bodies instead of just their heads, how the Polani twitched when sound came from their left side. She wrote it all down. That night, alone in quarters that smelled like disinfectant and alien metal, Danny sat on the edge of her bunk. The room was designed for someone twice her size. Her feet dangled above the floor like a child sitting in an adult's chair. Through the small window, unfamiliar stars burned in colors she had no names for. She held up her hands and looked at them. Small, calloused from years of farm work back in Alberta. Scarred across the knuckles from a barbed wire fence she had mended when she was 15. These hands had pulled a calf from a frozen ditch in January. These hands had split firewood until her palms bled and then kept splitting. These hands had held her mother's fingers in a hospital room and had not let go for 9 hours. They were not strong hands by galactic standards. They were not fast. They could not crush metal or stop bullets or move in blurs, but they had never quit. Danny closed her notebook, set it on a shelf beside her bed, and turned off the light. In the darkness, she whispered to herself the same thing her mother used to say before every hard day on the ranch. They don't know what these hands can do. She closed her eyes and slept. Tomorrow they would laugh at her again. She was counting on it. 3 weeks into training, the holographic scoreboard in the main hall told a simple story. Danny Wren was last in everything. Last in strength, last in speed, last in strike force, last in reflex response. Her name sat at the bottom of every list like an anchor that could not be pulled up, but the scoreboard did not measure everything. The endurance march came on day 16. A 20-hour simulated cross-terrain exercise across 3 different hostile planet environments. Desert heat, mountain cold, Svimefolk. Every cadet carried a 40-pound pack adjusted to their species' gravity tolerance. For Danny, it was 40 Earth pounds. For the Brun, it was 400. Fair was fair. The Serati started fast. Their 4 arms pumped as they climbed over rocks and powered through sand. By hour 4, they were in the lead. By hour 6, the desert heat simulation had pushed their body temperature past safe limits. Serati were cold-blooded. They needed shade. They needed rest. One by one, they dropped to their knees and called for water breaks. The Brun were slower but steady. Their stone bodies carried the weight without complaint. But when the terrain shifted from hard rock to loose sand and then to swamp mud, their heavy frames began to sink. Every step cost them 3 times the energy. By hour 8, Fossick was gasping through his stone teeth. By hour 10, 2 Brun cadets were on medical stretchers. The Polani were a disaster. Their insectoid bodies were built for short bursts of incredible speed, not long marches. Their energy burned hot and fast. By hour 5, most of them were shaking. By hour 7, Raviki collapsed face first into the mud and had to be carried out. Danny kept walking. Hour 7. Hour 10. Hour 12. She drank water from her bottle. She ate a protein bar. She adjusted the straps on her pack when they dug into her shoulders. Her legs hurt. Her feet blistered. Sweat soaked through her uniform until it stuck to her skin like a second layer. She did not stop. By hour 14, Danny was one of only 9 cadets still moving. By hour 18, she was one of 3. By hour 20, when the simulation ended, she crossed the finish line on her own 2 feet. Her legs were shaking. Her lips were cracked. Blood had soaked through the bandages on her blisters, but she was standing. Instructor Heron watched from the observation deck. He said nothing, but he watched. The scoreboard did not have a column for this. There was no metric for a creature that simply refused to fall down. The results were posted quietly. Danny had finished. Most of the species built like gods had not. Nobody mentioned it at dinner. Danny spent her evenings the same way every night. She sat in the dining hall with her protein bars and her notebook, and she watched. She had filled 30 pages already. Each page was dedicated to a different cadet. She drew sketches of how they stood, how they moved, how they fought. She noted every habit and every weakness. The Serati telegraphed their punches. The upper right shoulder always dropped a half-second before a strike. Every time, they could not help it. It was built into their bone structure. The Brun could not change direction once they committed to a charge. Their mass made sharp turns impossible. If you stepped sideways at the right moment, they would blow past you like a truck missing a turn. The Polani froze when startled from their left side. Their compound eyes had a blind spot, just a fraction of a second, but it was there. She wrote it all down. Pages and pages of weaknesses that nobody else was looking for because nobody else needed to. When you were strong enough to crush a wall, you did not bother studying the cracks. Danny studied the cracks. On day 19, something small happened that changed things. Fossick, the big Brun who had laughed at her on the first day, hurt his lower back during a lifting drill. A muscle deep beneath his stone plating had twisted wrong. The medical staff gave him painkillers and told him to rest for 5 days. Brun were expected to endure pain without complaint, so none of his classmates visited him. Showing concern would be an insult. Danny did not know that rule. Or maybe she did not care. She walked into the medical wing that evening and found Fossick lying on a reinforced bed, staring at the ceiling with his jaw clenched. She pulled a chair next to him, sat down, and said, "I know a stretch that might help." He looked at her like she had spoken a foreign language. "Why would you help me?" "I laughed at you." "Yeah," she said, "but your back hurts now." She showed him a simple stretch, a human thing, something her father had taught her for when your muscles seized up after a long day of fencing. Fossick was skeptical, but the pain was bad enough that he tried it. The relief was not instant, but by the next morning, he could sit up without grinding his teeth. 2 days later, he was back in training. The medical staff had predicted 5 days. Fossick found Danny in the dining hall that evening. He sat down across from her, his stone body making the bench groan. He stared at her for a long time. "Why did you help me?" he asked again. Danny shrugged. "Where I come from, you help people. That's it." He did not laugh at her after that. That night, Danny submitted a request for access to the Institute's metallurgy workshop. It was approved within the hour. Nobody questioned it. Nobody cared what the human did in her spare time. That was their first mistake. The forge smelled like home. Not exactly like home. The metals were alien. The tools were too big. The furnace ran on plasma instead of coal. But the heat was real, and the weight of a hammer in her hand was real, and that was enough. Danny stood in the Institute's metallurgy workshop at 3 in the morning, covered in sweat and soot, holding a pair of tongs gripped around a glowing bar of Calvari steel. Calvari steel was the strongest alloy in common galactic use. Starship hulls were made from it. Military armor plating. Orbital station frameworks. It was shaped in factories by industrial presses that generated 400 tons of force, or by plasma cutters that burned at temperatures hot enough to melt rock. Nobody shaped Calvari steel by hand. The idea was laughable. Danny was not laughing. She was hammering. She had learned blacksmithing from her grandfather when she was 12. He had a small forge behind his house in Alberta. He made horseshoes and gate hinges, and once, for her 16th birthday, a small iron bracelet with her initials stamped into it. He taught her that metal was not your enemy. Metal wanted to be shaped. You just had to understand it. Listen to it. Feel when it was ready. Calvari steel did not want to be shaped. It fought her at every step. It cooled too fast. It cracked when she struck too hard. It warped when the temperature was uneven. She had ruined 11 bars already, and her arms ached from the hammering. But she came back every night. 3 hours of sleep, then the forge. Every night, during the day, training continued. A new phase had begun. Tactical problem solving under pressure. Squads of 4 cadets were dropped into simulated disaster zones and had to rescue trapped civilians, disable threats, and escape within a time limit that Danny's squad was assigned randomly. Fossick the Brun, Raviki the Polani, and a quiet Sarati named down who had not spoken more than 10 words since orientation. None of them wanted her. Raviki said it out loud during the briefing. "She will slow us down. Request a swap." Instructor Heron denied the request without explanation. Their first simulation was a collapsing building, a 4-story structure on a volcanic planet, shaking apart from seismic activity. 3 civilian dummies were trapped on the 2nd floor. The team had 12 minutes. Fossick charged in first. He found a crumbling wall and braced it with his massive body. His strength was incredible, but the building was failing from 6 different points. Holding one wall meant nothing when the ceiling was splitting above him. Raviki darted through the rubble. Her speed was beautiful. She found 2 of the 3 civilians in seconds. But then a secondary collapse sealed the corridor behind her. She froze. Her mandibles clicked in panic. She could not find a way out. Alan stood outside the building entrance. He was supposed to go in. He did not move. His 4 arms hung at his sides. His eyes were wide and unfocused. He had locked up under pressure. It happened to Sarati sometimes. Their warrior culture taught them to fight, not to think when everything was falling apart. Danny assessed the situation in 4 seconds. She ran to Fossick first. "Stop pushing the whole wall. See that beam? 3rd from the left. That's the load-bearing joint. Brace only that. Let the rest go." Fossick looked at her like she was crazy. But his arms were shaking, and he was out of ideas. He shifted his weight to the single beam. The rest of the wall crumbled, but the ceiling above the civilians held. The beam was the spine of the structure. Danny had seen it the moment she walked in. She keyed her radio. Riviki, stop. Breathe. There is a ventilation shaft on your right, 2 meters up. It connects to the east corridor. You are small enough to fit. Riviki found the shaft. She pulled herself up and through. She came out on the other side with both civilian dummies under her arms. Danny turned down. She did not shout. She did not grab him. She walked up to him, looked up into his massive reptilian face, and said one sentence. Owen, pick up the third civilian and carry it to the exit. Just that. Nothing else. One task. One clear instruction. Owen's eyes focused. He nodded. He walked into the building, picked up the last dummy, and carried it out. They cleared the simulation with 40 seconds to spare. It was not the highest score. 2 other teams had faster times. But Danny's squad was the only one where no team member had been marked as a casualty. Heron watched the replay of the simulation 3 times that evening. He paused it on the moment Danny redirected Fossick to the load-bearing beam. He paused it again on the ventilation shaft call. He paused it a 3rd time on the moment she calmed down with a single sentence. Then he closed the replay and sat in silence for a long time. That night, Danny went back to the forge. The 12th bar of Kelvari steel was in the furnace. She watched the metal glow. She felt the heat on her face. She gripped the hammer. She struck. The metal rang. It did not crack. It did not warp. For the first time, the Kelvari steel bent under her hammer the way iron bent back home. Not because she was stronger than it, because she had finally learned its language. Danny pulled the glowing piece from the furnace with her tongs and held it up. It was rough. It was unfinished. But it was real. She nodded and set it down to cool. She had a long way to go. But the metal had listened. Word traveled fast in a building full of warriors with nothing to do between drills. By the end of the 5th week, every cadet at the Concord Institute had heard about Danny Wren's simulation performance. Opinions split the cohort down the middle like an axe through wood. Half of them admitted, quietly and only among their own species, that the human had done something impressive. The other half were furious about it. The loudest voice in the furious half belonged to a Serati cadet named Dren. Dren came from the kind of family that carved their war records into stone monuments. His grandfather had led a fleet. His mother had commanded a planetary garrison. His father had died in battle, and it was considered an honor. Dren was 7 feet tall, young, fast for a Serati, and absolutely certain that the universe had a natural order. The strong led. The weak followed. And humans were the weakest creatures he had ever seen. The idea that a human had outperformed Serati cadets in any exercise, even a simulation, made his blood burn. He found Danny in the main hall on a Tuesday evening. She was sitting alone as usual, eating a protein bar, writing in her notebook. The hall was full. Every table was occupied. Dren walked up to her table and stood over her. His shadow blocked out the overhead lights. I challenge you to a crucible match, he said. Loud enough for the whole room to hear. The hall went quiet. Fork stopped. Mandibles froze. Every eye turned at a crucible match was an old tradition. A formal one-on-one combat test. Full contact. No weapons. No automat. The match ended when one person submitted or could not continue. It was legal under Institute rules, but it was rare. The last one had been 4 years ago and had ended with a Brun cadet spending 2 months in the medical wing. Dren stood there with all 4 arms crossed, staring down at Danny with golden reptilian eyes. He expected her to refuse. That was the point. A public refusal would brand her as a coward. She would never recover from it. She would leave the Institute in shame, and the natural order would be restored. Danny looked up from her notebook. She studied his face the way she studied everything. Then she said, "Okay." Dren blinked. His arms uncrossed slightly. "You accept." I said, "Okay." She went back to writing in her notebook. Dren stood there for another 3 seconds, unsure what to do with a response he had not expected, then turned and walked away. The hall buzzed with whispers before he reached the door. That night, Fossick found Danny in the corridor outside her quarters. His stone face was harder to read than most, but she had learned the signs. He was worried. "He will kill you," Fossick said. "I'm not being dramatic. Serati do not hold back in crucible matches. He has 4 arms. Bone plating. He is faster than any Serati in this cohort. You scored 87 on the strength test. I remember my score, Danny said. Then why did you accept? Danny leaned against the wall. Because if I said no, I would just be the weak human who said no. At least this way, I get to show them something. Fossick shook his head. Show them what? How easily humans break. Danny smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the kind of smile her mother used to wear before walking into a storm to bring the cattle home. Maybe, she said. Maybe something else. Raviki found Danny the next morning in the training yard. The Polani had been cooler toward Danny than hostile in recent weeks. The simulation had earned a grudging respect. But this was different. This is not logical, Raviki said. Her mandibles clicked in the pattern Danny had learned meant frustration. You cannot beat him in a physical fight. The probability is 0. Probably, Danny agreed. Then what? Danny looked at her. Have you ever watched a human boxing match? Raviki had not. Sometimes the fight is not about winning, Danny said. Sometimes it is about showing people what you are willing to stand up for. Raviki clicked her mandibles again, but said nothing more. Danny did not spend the next 2 days in the gym. She did not run extra drills or practice combat moves. She went to the metallurgy workshop. The sound of her hammer rang through the empty corridors at midnight, at 2 in the morning, at 4. She worked through the heat and the sparks and the ache in her shoulders. The night before the match, she returned to her quarters carrying something wrapped in cloth. She set it on her desk and sat on her bunk. A knock came at her door. She opened it and found Instructor Heron standing in the corridor. His scarred face was unreadable. In all her weeks at the Institute, she had never heard of an instructor visiting a cadet in their quarters. It simply did not happen. He stepped inside. He looked at the cloth bundle on the desk. Then he looked at her. I have read about your species, he said. His voice was low and measured. You are persistence predators. You once chased animals across open plains until those animals collapsed from exhaustion. You broke your own bones and they healed stronger. You walked on fractured legs to reach your children. You built fires in the dark when every other creature hid from it. He paused. What are you planning, Cadet Wren? Danny met his eyes. 4-armed, 7-foot, battle-scarred Serati veteran. She did not flinch. I am planning to show them what a human is. Heron looked at her for a long time. Then he turned and left without another word. Danny turned off the light and lay in the dark, listening to her own heartbeat. Tomorrow it would be fast. Tomorrow it would be loud. But tonight it was steady. The arena had not been this full in 4 years. Every seat in the Concord Institute's central combat ring was taken. Cadets lined the upper railings 3 rows deep. Instructors stood along the back wall with their arms folded. A visiting dignitary, Admiral Saradin of the Galactic Protectorate, sat in the observation box above the arena floor. She had come to evaluate top candidates for early placement. Instead, she was about to watch a human get destroyed. Dren entered first. The crowd roared. He was 7 feet of bone-plated muscle, for arms flexing, golden eyes locked forward. He rolled his neck, and the joints cracked like stones breaking. He had won every sparring match in the cohort. He was the future of the Serati military tradition. He was built to fight. Danny entered second. There was no roar. There was barely any sound at all. A few whispers. A few clicks from a Polani section. She walked to the center of a ring in her standard training gear, her brown hair pulled back, her hands wrapped in cloth tape. She looked small. She looked breakable. She looked like someone who had wandered into the wrong room. She was carrying a cloth bundle. She set it down at the edge of the ring. The match official, a retired Brun referee, called them to center. He explained the rules. Full contact. No weapons. The match ends on submission or inability to continue. Both fighters confirmed. The bell sounded. Dren charged. He crossed the ring in 2 strides and swung his upper right arm in a hook that could have caved in a steel door. Danny was already moving. She had spent 5 weeks watching Serati fight. She knew Dren dropped his upper right shoulder before every strike. She stepped left. The fist cut through the air where her head had been a half-second earlier. He swung again with his lower left arm. She ducked, rolled right, came up 3 feet away. The crowd murmured. She had not been hit, but she had not fought back either. Drin pressed forward. He threw a combination, all four arms working in sequence. Upper right, lower left, lower right. It was fast and brutal and would have broken bones on contact. Danny wove between the strikes like water moving around rocks. She was not faster than him. She was reading him. Every twitch, every weight shift, every breath. He caught her on the fourth exchange. A glancing blow from his lower right arm slammed into her ribs. Danny staggered sideways and dropped to one knee. The crowd surged. Several Serati cheered. This was the beginning of the end. Danny spat blood onto the arena floor. She stood up. She raised her hands. Drin hit her again 2 minutes later. A backhand across her shoulder that spun her around. She hit the ground hard. The referee looked at her. She held up one finger. Wait. She pushed herself up and stood again. The crowd went quiet. He hit her a third time. A straight punch to her stomach that lifted her off the ground. She crashed down on her back, and the air left her lungs in a wheeze. She lay there for 3 seconds. The referee began counting. Danny rolled on her side. She coughed. Blood dripped from her lip. She got her hands under her and pushed up. Her arms shook. Her ribs screamed. She stood. The arena was silent now. Not impressed. Not angry. Confused. Every species in the room had a breaking point. A moment where the body said stop and the mind obeyed. They had just watched Danny pass that moment 3 times and keep going. 0.7 minutes into the match, Drin was breathing hard. Serati were built for explosive power, not sustained combat. His strikes had slowed. His footwork was getting sloppy. He was still dangerous, but he was tired, and he was frustrated. He had expected this to last 30 seconds. Danny saw the change. She had been waiting for it. She stopped dodging. She stepped in. Drin swung his upper right arm, and she moved inside the arc, too close for the blow to land with full force. She grabbed his lower right arm at the elbow joint, exactly where the bone plating was thinnest. She had seen in her notebook. Page 14. She twisted. Drin howled. She used his momentum against him. Her left foot hooked behind his ankle. A simple sweep. Judo. Her grandfather had taught her that too. Drin was bigger, heavier, and stronger, but he was off balance and his arm was locked in a direction it was not supposed to go. He hit the ground. The arena floor cracked under his weight. Danny was on him before he could recover. She wrapped her legs around his lower right arm and locked his upper right arm with both hands in a hold she had designed herself. For arms meant 4 joints. She had spent nights in her quarters figuring out a submission that accounted for all of them. Drin thrashed. He bucked. He tried to roll, but every direction he moved tightened the lock. Danny held on. Her whole body was the anchor. Her ribs were screaming. Her lip was bleeding. Her arms burned. She did not let go. 0.8 seconds later, Drin slapped the floor with his free hand. Submission. The arena was dead silent. 500 cadets, and not one sound. Danny released him. She stood up slowly. Everything hurt. She walked to the edge of the ring and picked up the cloth bundle. She carried it to the center of the arena and unwrapped it. Inside was a blade, 12 inches long. Simple, elegant, forged from Calvari steel by hand. No industrial press. No plasma cutter. A hammer. A furnace. Human hands. She held it up so the light caught the edge. "This metal is harder than my bones," she said. Her voice was raw, but I shaped it. Not because I am stronger than it, because I am more stubborn than it. That is what a human is. She placed the blade on the arena floor and walked out. Nobody laughed. Admiral Sarah Din did not sleep that night. She sat at her guest quarters aboard the Institute's orbital ring, reviewing footage on a holographic display. The fight, the blade, the words. She played the moment Danny ran, held up the Calvari steel blade 7 times. She zoomed in on the metal. She ran a materials scan from the workshop logs. Hand-forged, no machine assistance, no plasma cutting, heat, hammer, and patience. The scan confirmed what should have been impossible. At dawn, she called a meeting with the Institute's senior instructors. 12 of them sat around a long table in the faculty chamber. Heron was among them. The Admiral placed her hands flat on the table and asked one question. Why was this cadet ranked last in every category? Silence. She waited. Heron spoke first. His voice was calm and steady, the way it always was, but there was something underneath it, something that had been building for weeks. Because every ranking metric this institute uses is built for species with natural physical advantages, he said. Our strength tests measure peak force. Humans are not strong by peak force standards. Our speed tests measure reflex time. Humans are not fast by reflex standards. Our combat scores reward size, power, and natural armor. He paused. There is no metric for endurance beyond 12 hours. There is no score for the ability to read a collapsing structure and direct a team through it in 4 seconds. There is no measurement for forging a metal that requires 400 tons of industrial pressure using nothing but a hammer and willpower. The room was quiet. Our system measured what Cadet Wren could not do, Heron said. It never once measured what she could. Admiral Den nodded slowly. She looked around the table at 11 instructors who had spent careers training the galaxy's strongest species. Fix it, she said. Within a week, the Institute announced a restructured evaluation system. New metrics for sustained endurance, tactical creativity, team leadership under pressure, and adaptive problem solving. The changes were not made as a political gesture. They were made because Danny Wren had proven the old system was incomplete. It had been measuring bodies, not minds. It had been scoring power, not will. Danny was promoted to squad leader for the next training phase. Her team was the same. Fosik, Reviki, Aun. But things were different now. They followed her because they chose to. Fosik walked beside her on the way to their first briefing as a reform squad. His stone feet shook the corridor with every step. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I laughed at you on the first day." "I remember," Danny said. "I will never laugh at a human again." She looked up at him. His stone face was serious. She nodded once, and they kept walking. Reviki came to Danny that evening with a request. She wanted to learn how humans read structural failure patterns, how Danny had seen the load-bearing beam in the simulation, how she had known about the ventilation shaft. Danny opened her notebook and spent 2 hours teaching the Polani how to look at a building the way a human looked at it. Not as a thing to run through, but as a puzzle to solve that Reviki's compound eyes glittered as she absorbed the information. "Your species cannot run fast," she said. "You cannot fight well. You cannot see in the dark or hear across distances. But you see patterns that we miss." "We had to," Danny said. "On our planet, everything was trying to kill us. We survived by paying attention." Anna changed the most quietly. The big Sarati still did not talk much. But one morning, Danny noticed him sitting in the dining hall with a small notebook open in front of him. He was writing observations, watching how cadets moved, studying habits. He looked up, saw Danny watching, and gave her the smallest nod. She smiled. The hardest conversation came 3 days after the fight. Dren found Danny alone in the corridor outside the metallurgy workshop. She tensed when she saw him. His bruises had faded, but the memory had not. He stopped 3 paces away. Sarati did not apologize with words. Their culture did not work that way. Words were cheap. Actions were everything. Dren placed his upper right hand flat against his chest, over the place where Sarati's heart sat behind 3 layers of bone plating. It was the deepest gesture of respect his species could offer. It meant, "I see your strength and I honor it." It was given to enemies who had proven themselves in battle. In 300 years of Institute history, no Sarati had ever given it to a human. Danny looked at him. She placed her own hand over her heart. She did not know if humans had an equivalent gesture, but it felt right. Dren turned and walked away. That was enough. The forge blade was placed in the Institute's Hall of Achievement the following week. A glass case alongside trophies from the greatest cadets in the school's history. A small plaque at the base read, "Shaped by hand. Shaped by will. Cadet Danny Wren, Earth." Admiral Saradin offered Danny early placement in the Protectorate's First Contact Division, the unit responsible for making peaceful contact with newly discovered species. "We have plenty of soldiers who can break things," the Admiral told her. "We need someone who can build something out of nothing." Danny accepted that on her last night at the Institute, she stood at a viewport on the orbital ring, looking out at the stars. Fossick stood beside her. His reflection in the glass was twice her size and made of stone. "Are you afraid?" he asked. Danny watched a distant star pulse with blue light. She thought about the ranch in Alberta, the frozen calves, the broken fences, the forge in her grandfather's shed, the hammer in her hand. "Always," she said. "That is the other thing about humans. We do it anyway." The stars burned. Danny Rand stood among them. Small, soft, breakable, and absolutely unbreakable.